in America fear their government, and the government is being run by too many powerful agencies like the IRS and others. I think it's time the people take the country back through their representative government.
Hey, Mr. Politician, living on that hill, living in that life of luxury, on we the people's bill. Don't have a clue how the other half lives, and that is a shame. It's time to stop the tyranny. You keep pushing through your bills. Going for revolution, going for it now. It's time to save our Constitution while we still got the guns in our hands.
Hi, and welcome to Freedom TV. We've got another great show for you this week. We have a very special guest on who's going to be talking to us about probably the most difficult thing on the face of the planet to recycle and reuse: human waste. And believe me, you're going to be impressed by what you hear. But first, we've got a very good segment from Chris Janowski from Surviving and Thriving, which I think you'll find very interesting. It's a very creative way of using tin cans. Now, I know that sounds really strange, but when you're out walking around the forest, one of the things that you seem to always be able to find is a tin can. Now, what can you do with these tin cans? Well, Chris is going to show you exactly all the things that you can do with it. So Chris Janowski and Surviving and Thriving.
Old tin cans are found almost everywhere. Any place you could possibly think of going, there's tin cans. And actually, it's a pretty valuable find for you in a survival situation. Should you find one, snag it and keep it. We can use a tin can for all kinds of things. The first and most obvious probably to you is a cup. We've got to have a way to get drinking water and to comfortably drink it without laying on our face all the time. That works out real well. We can boil water in it. There's all kinds of things that we can use this cup for. We can collect berries in the cup, have a way of keeping them. We can crush the berries in the cup to make a juice. Out of the lid, if you find a tin can, the lid's not far. Usually it's still attached partially. Out of the lid, you can make a fine survival knife. One of the ways we do this is you take your lid, and if you want to get a nice straight edge, you might want to smash this stone against a stone and try to really get it nice and straight. You could form it to however you want it. Then you're going to take and go about 2/3 of the way up this can and bend it there. This gives you a nice surface that you're not going to cut yourself on. Just by nature of the way the can is cut, when they open it with an opener, it gives you a pretty sharp edge. You might want to elaborate on that edge some though. And what you're going to do then, and sooner or later you're going to have to, the more you use the knife, is take a stone, and start sharpening one side of that tin can. This is a pretty sharp can to begin with, but none of them are real dull. And you keep sharpening with a stone and keep going down to a smoother and smoother stone. And sooner or later you'll have a knife just like you'd buy at the store. This is shaped very similar to what they call an ulu, what the Eskimos use. And you can see, just from a tin can, you've got something that'll do work for you now. Fishing lures. We can take pieces bend them off and break them, make nice fishing lures. If you've got your survival kit together with you, you've got a couple little split rings and some spare hooks, and you can work up nice little spoons, nice little fishing lures, and they do work rather well. Here's that can we were using before. We're going to use it again to do some work for us. You got to pick this stuff up when you find it and you're in a survival situation. The can thing sort of bothers me. It's a shame that no matter where you go in the wilderness, basically, you will find a tin can somewhere. Anyhow, what we're going to do with this tin can now, I've got some water in it from the stream, and we suspect Giardia here, especially because we see beavers out there. So we're going to boil this water. We're going to address something about this water and drinking water here. An easy way to do this, if you've got a little bit of a survival kit made up for yourself, you're going to have some wire in there. If not, you should have a couple of small snares. You could use a snare for this. Something that's not going to burn very readily. All you need to do here to make a real fast way to boil this water is cut a couple of short sticks that have got V's and crotches so we can interlock them. Cut a longer one. The longer one especially has got to be green wood because you don't want it to burn over the fire. You're going to take one end of the stick and drive it in the ground to give yourself a little bit of support. Take the other stick, stick it in there, take your third stick, put that in there, set those a little bit, and you've got a pretty strong little gizmo here that you can use for cooking food or boiling water. I'm going to take just a fine piece of wire, hang it on our stick, and all we got to do is wait a little while and we're going to have some water.
Hi, welcome back to Freedom TV. I hope you enjoyed that little segment. I'm here today with a very special guest. This is Ole Ersson, and I'm very glad you could join us, Ole, for today and give us some information about a subject that's, well, it's a delicate subject sometimes for people, but it's a very important subject because I don't think there's anybody on the face of the planet who doesn't poop. And eventually we're going to have to find some way of doing it. So tell us a little bit about Humanare.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, Renee. To put things in perspective, I want us to take a bigger picture. So for a moment, I want to talk about permaculture. Permaculture, or permanent agriculture, is a design science whereby we create human settlements that are modeled after natural ecosystems. And in natural ecosystems, there's no such thing as waste.
Right, exactly.
What we normally think of waste from one process is actually food for another system or another
Right,
process.
exactly.
And if we take this very fundamental principle of permaculture, and in particular organic gardening, we can apply it to our own lives and start to recycle our own excrement. When we do this, we discover that it's not such a big problem that needs to be solved. It's something we can all do in our own personal lives if we so choose, and we can create nutrients out of what most people think of as waste.
Right, so there's actually no such thing as waste, just unused byproducts that are looking for a system and to kind of hook into. Now I understand this is composting human manure. What's the difference between this and just digging a pit, like a pit latrine or an outhouse? What's the difference between those two things?
There's a world of difference between privies or latrines and composting your excrement in a bucket composting toilet system. In the privy system, nutrients are lost. It's a simple system that anyone can create.
Right.
But it doesn't have the advantage of recycling your nutrients. In addition, it's not very aesthetic. Anybody who's used a privy has probably been turned off by the odors and so forth. So there are some fundamental differences between the two systems.
And then how about a septic tank? Is that just another sort of area out there, or does that do any composting itself, or is it really just kind of another system?
No, it actually doesn't. So let's talk for a moment about sewage processing or waste processing as it exists in America, which is a typical third world country. So in America, if you want to create a dwelling, you need to get a building permit, and typically the building authorities require you to connect to a legal sewage processing system.
Right.
So in a city, that typically is the centralized sewage system, the municipal sewage system. If you're out in the country and you don't have a centralized system available, then usually you're required to install what's called a septic system, which consists of the same appliance, a flush toilet, which flushes your waste into a receptacle where it gradually degrades and the nutrients are all lost. Unfortunately, in that process, as well as the central sewage system process, the nutrients are not only lost, but they create huge amounts of pollution. So
really?
with a septic system, you pollute the groundwater or your local aquifer. In a centralized sewage system, for example, in the city of Portland, the water that is discharged from the sewage system ends up going into the rivers, polluting the rivers. Now, if the system of processing were perfect and all of the what potentially are nutrients were removed, there would be minimal pollution. Unfortunately, the system is not perfect, and a lot of the nutrients pass through the process unchanged and end up as pollutants rather than nutrients, which is what happens in a composting system.
Right, exactly. And then even here in Portland with the combined sewer overflow that we currently have now, sometimes when it rains, you'll have raw sewage going straight into the river. It doesn't even get the opportunity to sort of sit out for a while and calm down.
That's exactly true, and that is despite enormous, mind-boggling expenditures.
I know.
The city of Portland, the investment in our centralized sewer infrastructure is in probably the tens of billions in current dollars.
Right.
And despite that, our system still fails a large percentage of the time, particularly in winter, when we have large rain events, we have raw sewage going into the rivers.
Oh, that's incredible.
Okay.
That's
now the
really
same
amazing.
thing is true in septic systems where you live in the country.
Okay. So
Pollution occurs there also on a routine basis. In fact, they're programmed, the systems are programmed to discharge effluent into the ground, which thereby contaminates the local water aquifer.
oh my God. So is this very old, or is this kind of a new sort of rendition of something that has been done in the past and was forgotten, or is this sort of a
Humanure
new?
composting is really it's a new idea. It's probably less than 20 or 30 years old. Yes, it really is new. Now, the natural decomposition of excrement, of course, has occurred in natural systems since time immemorial.
Right.
But the concerted approach to composting your excrement in a sanitary and environmentally appropriate fashion is probably just a few decades old.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I would have thought, well, they've rediscovered this new thing that they have been using for thousands of years. But again, this is the evolution of our thinking as to how to deal with our own excrement. Now, I know this is a composting system. How does what you're doing differ from like I've seen like composting toilets you can buy on the internet?
Good question. I have an analogy that I make where I talk about our current sewage system as a Hummer. If you think of that as a Hummer, it's a gas-guzzling monster vehicle that is inappropriate in today's times. Centralized sewage systems have the same problem. They are not really appropriate ecologically for our times. I compare that to commercially available composting systems. They're like a Prius. In other words, it's a great principle, but it's very high-tech. The systems are complicated. You need professional mechanics to maintain your Prius.
Oh, really?
You can't do it yourself.
And the same thing with your composting, your professional composting toilet. That I imagine that's the same problem.
Yes, they're expensive, they're complicated, they need mechanics, composting toilet mechanics to make sure that they're operating. Finally, the final analogy is the composting system that we're talking about today, or the bucket toilet system, coupled with a composting area in your garden, is like a bicycle. So which do you want? Do you want to ride your bike, or do you want to use a Hummer? Or are you going to take the middle approach, which is a Prius? They probably all have their appropriate roles, but I think most of us are tending to realize that we need more systems like bicycles and fewer systems like Hummers.
Now, is this done here, or is this is it just done in the United States, or are there places around the world where this is starting to happen?
This can be done anywhere because the implements to do it cost just a few dollars.
Oh, right.
A system costs $5 to $10. It's a perfect complement to organic gardening and farming. And it's appropriate anywhere on the planet. Now, probably in polar areas where you're not gardening, it wouldn't be an appropriate system. But for the most part, it's practical all over the planet.
Great. Well, we've got some pictures of the system that you're talking about. So if we can start bringing up a few of those pictures, we can look at exactly what the bits and pieces of the system are. Like you said, it's very, very simple. It's very straightforward. You don't need a whole bunch of high-techy things and a lot of expense. And the first picture shows just the things that you need to actually make it happen. Do we have the photograph coming up? All righty. It'll be coming up shortly. In the meantime, I'll wait until it comes up, but I've got another couple of questions for you. Now, the system is composting, right? Now, how does this work as far as the, oh, here we go. We've got the if you can describe some of those guys for us.
These pictures here show the tools that you need, basically a screwdriver and a saw, a couple of 5-gallon plastic buckets, which are easily available in the urban waste stream, some screws and some small pieces of wood. There's also a standard toilet seat. And what you do, it takes about an hour to make one of these.
Really?
You cut off one end of one of the buckets, and that creates a section of bucket that slips inside the other. To that, you secure your toilet seat. And now you have a toilet seat that can be easily transferred from one bucket to another. Very, very simple.
Okay.
And then that allows you to use additional buckets, one or more buckets, as your collection devices. And the toilet seat with its flange, which is part of another bucket, allows you to move the seat between buckets.
Excellent.
Okay, the cost of this system is well less than $10. You're really only item that you generally would purchase would be the toilet seat itself.
Right.
The other items are pennies a piece.
Yeah, you can get them anywhere. Okay, can we have the next CG coming up? I think it goes on and shows the bucket all put together. And we can have a look at that and see how it looks all together. There you go, a little dunny.
Now,
how about that?
One of the virtues of a system like this is it mimics a conventional toilet. So
Right,
people know how to use it.
Yeah.
There's no
Where's the handle
squatting
to
or
flush?
anything else, exactly, besides the flush and the water. Another advantage is because there's no water required, you can put one of these anywhere.
Anywhere, exactly.
Plumbing is not required. All you need is a few square feet of space to set up a system like this.
Excellent. I think we've got 2 more slides coming up that show you the kind of finishing off products of what happens. We've got the, one of them is the what you do with the bucket, because obviously you have the bucket there. And then, okay, we've got this, and what's she doing there with, what's she putting in the bucket itself?
Okay, so what you have now is a bucket with a toilet seat on it. This is where you use your toilet. You put your excrement in this bucket. In addition, you can put any household compostables such as vegetable scraps and so forth, right?
Okay.
Toilet paper can also go in this. Okay, after you've made any additions to the bucket, you add a second ingredient, sawdust or wood chips. That's why this is often called the sawdust toilet.
Oh, okay.
Any sort of high carbon material balances the high nitrogen excrement and vegetable scraps that are put in. So you get a perfect mixture to compost in your compost.
Exactly. And then the second picture was the actual composting sections, like you would compost it like you would do normal composting.
Yes, and this is something that any organic gardener will be familiar with.
Right.
It's a composting system where you recycle your yard debris and your kitchen scraps and so forth. This is just another compostable item that's composted in that fashion.
Right. So can you mix this in with your normal composting?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, the high nitrogen inputs from manures and urine allow us to compost many things that normally we wouldn't be able to compost. A lot of people, when they have prunings from their trees, for example, holly is a very resistant to composting. But if you have high nitrogen inputs like this, you can compost virtually anything.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's incredible. Now, I know you've been doing this a long time. We just have a couple minutes before we have to go to a break. But I know you raised your kids doing this. How did that happen? And then afterwards, did they continue doing it? Have they continued doing it? I mean, tell me about growing up.
Good question.
Composting.
Our kids grew up with this, so for them it was not there wasn't a transition.
Right.
There was no mental block to this. They grew up with it, and it's very similar to a conventional toilet in any fashion. Do they still do it? Whenever they visit us, they do. They use our system, of course, and we encourage that. You do need a composting. It's a system.
Yeah.
The bucket itself is simply the collection receptacle.
Right.
So you could ask me the same question: do our kids compost their vegetable scraps? If they don't have a compost pile available, they can't do that.
Exactly.
We always have that where we live,
Right.
so we're able to do that.
So it really requires you having some sort of space where you can actually do this
Absolutely.
composting.
It's essential to have a composting area.
Right. Okay, I've got one more question for you before we go, and this is a really quick one. Now, I know that it started here in Portland. Can you estimate about how many people have actually started doing this here in Portland? Do you have any idea?
I know probably a couple dozen people who are doing it.
Excellent.
Yes, right. And I've given sessions, many sessions where I've explained to people how to do this. I've showed them our system, and I've been surprised that many people were already doing it.
Oh,
actually,
really?
I've attended natural building conferences when I put on a presentation. Sometime during the presentation, I'll ask how many people are actually doing this, and in certain circles of people who are interested in alternative technologies, it's typically 1/3 to 2/3 of people are already doing this.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, we're going to have some more pictures and some more information when we come back from a short break. We're going to take a short break right now. And I know you're watching TV, but the next 3 little tiny clips are about not watching TV. And then we're going to have a little bit of a segment about a school called the Delphian School. That's called Summer at Delphi. So if we can have those roll in, we will join you in a very few minutes, probably about 4 minutes.
Obsession. Fascination. Fetish. Fragmentation. Why are 9 out of 10 women dissatisfied with some aspect of their own bodies? The beauty industry is the beast.
A 49-year-old unidentified man went berserk last night.
Where did she get her view of the world?
Shotgun. 14 people are dead, including 3
Who will be her role models?
Never been a better time to buy.
What values will she have? Whose child is she? Yours or the network's? Take back your children. Turn off the TV.
Burger, fries. There's never been a better time to buy.
Your living room is the factory. The product being manufactured is you.
Burger, fries.
The video you are about to see was created and produced by students of the Delphian School.
Going to Delphi for the summer. Better get your running shoes on. So much to do, so much that's new. Get ready for the summer of your life. You'll be running round from sun up to sundown, learning things you never knew before. Doing things together, making friends you'll keep forever. So get ready for the summer of your life. Get ready for the summer of your life.
Anyone who's gone to Delphi for the summer will tell you that Delphi is so much more than a summer camp. It's an incredibly challenging environment for anyone who wants to learn, thrive, and grow. And the best part is how much fun you can have doing just that. You'll be challenged with a wide range of sports, outdoor activities, and adventurous weekend trips that all take place at one of the most beautiful places on Earth. At the same time, you'll be challenged every day with improving your study skills, as well as your knowledge of math, science, English, and computer technology. The sole purpose of the Delphi Summer Program is to challenge young people in and out of the classroom and help them discover that their potential for success is unlimited. It's truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience, one you can experience every summer thanks to Delphi. So, get ready for the summer of your life.
So get ready for the summer of your life. Get ready for the summer of your life. So get ready for the summer of your life. Get ready for the summer of your life.
Summer at Delphi is a co-ed day and residential summer camp for students 8 to 18. Call us now at 1-800-626-6610 or look us up on our website at www.summeratdelphi.org.
Hi, welcome back to Freedom TV. We have a very special show for you today, and I'm here with Ole Ersson, and we're talking about humanure, which is kind of an interesting term. I really like that. Who invented that? Where did this guy come up from?
I think that was Joseph Jenkins'
Really?
invention,
What
right?
a great
the author
title.
of the Humanure Handbook.
That's really just an exceptional description of exactly what it is. Now, we were talking during the break about appropriate technologies, which is a term I've heard. I don't know too much about it. Can you tell us a little bit about
Let's
the whole
talk for a moment
concept?
about appropriate technology. So appropriate technologies are technologies that are simple, they're adaptable to anybody on the planet, they're technologies that are easy to maintain, inexpensive, and they work well. And they're not prone to failure. So those are the hallmarks of appropriate technology. Now, humanure composting is a perfect example of an appropriate technology. It's easy to maintain, it's simple, it's inexpensive. It can be done with no expertise. You don't need any experts to monitor your process and make sure that it's okay. And it's a perfect example of what complements organic gardening.
Exactly, and I mean, it could be just as simple. You don't need the toilet seat. I mean, you could just have a round circle, 4 pieces of wood, and you're done. So it's something that really, literally, anyone on the face of the planet could do it.
That's one thing I want to emphasize, is that this technology is affordable as a sewage system for anybody on the planet.
That's amazing.
$5 is affordable by anyone on the planet.
Exactly, and in a lot of places around the world, most of the equipment that you saw that we had, you know, scratch the pretty toilet seat, you could get it for free.
Absolutely true.
So
Absolutely
this
true.
is something that anyone
Contrast that with our centralized systems, which are only available to the wealthiest people on the planet and require hordes of technicians to maintain them in a functional fashion. And even that, and with mind-boggling expenditures, they still fail a certain percentage of the time.
Exactly.
Portland's system is a perfect example of that.
And the interesting thing about this, with the bucket system, I built an outhouse when I lived out in the country. Oh my God, you know, it's like we're talking major work, major expense. It's got to be this special little building. You got to run in the rain and the snow out to it. This, you can just stick the bucket in the corner of anywhere, and then take it out to your compost heap. So you don't need a special building set aside for this. Oh, that's incredible. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the human nutrient cycle. I read about that in the Humanure book of a closed system and a totally open system. And what we're trying to achieve with this is the closed system.
Yeah. Currently, with our centralized sewage system, our human nutrient cycle is broken. What this means is, instead of recycling the nutrients from our own excrement and using that to grow food, we import chemical fertilizers that usually come from oil-based chemicals with mega chemical factories to create them.
Right.
And then what do we do with our nutrients? At best, our systems totally waste them, but the actuality is that they're polluting in addition.
Right.
So that's the broken system. Expensive inputs, oil, wars to support our oil habits, and all of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then tremendous pollution. Okay, that's a broken system. The closed nutrient cycle, it's a circle. Okay, so we grow food, we eat it, we excrete, and then that excrement is composted to create
Right.
fertilizer to grow
Well,
more
back
food.
on the
so
food,
now
and it
we
just
have
goes
a
around and
circle.
around and around.
Okay,
Right.
that's the human nutrient
Right.
cycle.
And that doesn't require any of the infrastructure in order to do it. And that's I really like this because for me, I'm a big worm composter. And I went, yeah, right, we're going to pick up our garbage at the curbside and haul it to a site, and then we're going to compost, and then you're going to sell it back to me. Oh, yeah, right. That sounds like a real good idea. Taking it one step further, doing your own excrement, to me, this is just amazing. That, I mean, to me, that's the top of the line of being personally responsible. I don't use the term sustainable because for me, it doesn't really have a lot of definition. I kind of scratch my head and go, well, what does that mean? But when it comes to terms like self-reliant, personally responsible, it's my waste. I want to be responsible for it. I don't want it shipping down the road and out the door and over somebody else's property. I want to take care of it myself. And this system provides me the opportunity to actually do that.
That's a very good point, and I want to point out something else. When you process your own excrement, you know exactly the nutrients that go into your food.
Exactly. Exactly.
Contrast that again with our centralized sewage system. Anybody can dump anything that can be liquefied into that system, such as radioactive material, pesticides, you name it. Anything that can be liquefied will end up at our sewage processing plant, thereby polluting the sludge that comes out of that. Now, I know some farmers use the sludge, which is a byproduct of the sewage processing plant. I would never want to use that because we have no idea what is actually in it. It's really, I consider it a toxic material, what comes out of a sewage processing plant. So you can't recycle those nutrients. At best, they're wasted. But in fact, the reality is even worse. They turn to become pollutants.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't look very labor intensive to do this sort of thing, but how much time would you estimate is actually involved in doing this, changing over from like a toilet to, because basically a toilet is, well, you have to actually, no, I guess you'd use toilet paper too, so you couldn't factor that in, but basically it's just flush and go and you don't have to deal with it. You got to clean it every once in a while. How much time differential?
Let's speak about the labor involved in the process. Now, when I say that, it's important to mention that there's a lot of labor that goes into the capital supporting the infrastructure to enable that system.
Right.
But let's leave that aside for a moment. Okay. So the process of collecting and composting your own excrement takes a modicum of effort. I would say probably for a typical household, 15 minutes to half an hour per week.
Really?
Okay. Now that's part of your gardening, so part of your composting process. So it's difficult to separate composting your kitchen waste and your yard debris from this.
Right.
But I suspect it probably adds a small amount of time to the effect of 15 or minutes to a half an hour a week.
Right. Now, I noticed that in one of the systems or in the book, it was talking about separating the urine out from the feces. Why would you do that?
It's not necessary to do that. However, urine has a special place in the composting process because, for one, it's sterile. So you don't have the pathogen
So there's
issues.
no pathogens in
There are
in
no
the urine.
pathogens unless you have a urinary tract infection.
Okay.
So in some cases there are some issues. But in general, urine is a sterile, very safe material. And it's in a form that plants can immediately utilize. So people can collect their urine, dilute it a little bit with water because it does have a fair amount of salt in it. Salt can, if it's too concentrated, burn plants.
Right.
So you dilute it with water and it can be put directly on plants. So it's much more flexible than solid excrement, which should be composted to not only sterilize the pathogens, but render it odorless and so forth.
Right. And speaking of pathogens, that is one of the things that, one of the reasons that they tell you, oh, don't put meat in, you know, your worm bin and all this other stuff. Well, obviously you're dealing with human pathogens in the composting process. So why does this work out okay?
Okay, the pathogen issue is way, way overblown. There's a term for this, it's fecophobia. Okay. But what I want to point out is people are much more concerned about this than they need to be. The composting process is very, very good at destroying pathogens. Now, we typically, in our compost pile, achieve 140 to 160 degrees. That's greater than pasteurization temperature. Pasteurization temperature is 159 degrees. We know that pasteurizing for less than a minute will destroy any pathogens. Now, there's a very interesting curve or graph in the Humanare handbook which shows that the same process of sterilizing or destroying pathogens also occurs at lower temperatures. It just takes a little bit more time.
Oh,
so
I
for
see.
example, at 120 degrees, which most people can easily achieve in their compost pile, it takes 24 hours to destroy any human pathogens. So the pathogen issue is a real issue, but it's not a big deal.
Oh, okay.
Now, the commercially available composting toilets do not achieve high temperatures that you get from what's called thermophilic or heat-loving composting. They use a process which is more properly termed moldering. In other words, the additions to your composting toilet stay more or less at room temperature, and the pathogens eventually die just because they're starved of the nutrients that they need to live. But it takes a much longer time. It typically on the order of 6 months to a year for your commercial composting toilets.
Now let's get into the dark and dirty here. How about the legality of this? I mean, I called down to the officialdom down there and had them screaming and climbing the walls when I suggested putting in a privy. So how are they going to act when I ask to do this?
Let's talk about this, and it's not a simple issue. There are several ways that sewage is regulated. The number one way is if you want to create a dwelling, a legal living dwelling, you're required to connect to a legal sewage processing system. Because actually there's gray water also that must be processed. Water from showering and washing dishes and so forth also has to be processed. So regardless of whether you compost your excrement, you still need some way of ensuring that your gray water and other water waste, so-called waste stream, doesn't create a public health hazard. So that's one way of regulating the process. In other words, to get a building permit, you need to connect to a legal system. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it. And composting is a widely accepted and time-honored processing used by millions of gardeners. Portland City Code actually is in the city code allows well-maintained compost areas in the city, so long as they're fed by yard debris and vegetable matter and vegetable waste. The terms you can look at the city code to see that. So one could say it might be considered a gray area, but I would say one reading of the code would say that this is a legal process. Now, I've discussed this with an attorney, and he totally agreed with me. If you were to ask your sanitarian, they might have a different perspective. So it's certainly a gray area.
It's a gray area, but so far so good.
The final thing to mention here is Oregon actually regulates composting also, but only in large quantities. So typically the Department of Environmental Quality regulates composting operations greater than 20 tons. Clearly the system we're talking about is outside of that regulations.
Now we do have a few more photographs that I'd like to put up, and this is a little bit different system. This is a worm composting system. And this one's, I really like these photographs. I thought that was really cool system because the building is just so nice looking. So this is the, I think you can see it's definitely a step up toilet. And the opening slot, I guess there's no toilet seat on this one. It's just you sit on the bench and away you go.
Now this one is created by Kiko Denzer, who's a well-known local and natural builder. So his method is vermicomposting, which means the worms accelerate the composting process. Now anybody who's had a composting system knows that worms play an integral role in breaking down in composting and breaking down vegetable matter into the final compost process. So they tend to live on the periphery of a hot compost pile because the center of the pile is way too hot for them to survive. But they're on the perimeter, and as the pile burns out and the process comes to an end, the worms migrate into the center and finish the process. So your compost is full of worms.
Excellent. Well, if we can have the rest of those photographs really quickly through there. I know we need to go to a break very shortly, but if we can have the rest of the photographs in that series. This is the bucket that collects the urine. And the next one, this is, you can see the little flag in it that's telling you how full it is. And then the next photograph is the Bible, the Bible, the Humanare Handbook. And this is the only thing I could find out there on Humanare was this book, and it's amazing, and it's available online. You can just go online and get it. And then the next screen has the websites on it, which that's Ole's website up there at the top, and then the Humanare Handbook. And then KBOO has a wonderful audio interview with Ole, only somebody needs to tell them it isn't working at the moment because I tried to get into it about 4 or 5 times. But there's some information for you. And with the worm composting, that's similar basically to what you're doing, but he's actually just putting the worms right into the actual unit itself. Is that pretty much the difference? Yes, and
when you do that, because the worms are burned by the sodium content of urine, that's why it's essential to sequester your urine. So his toilet is designed with a little funnel in the front of his toilet which separates the urine and runs it into a bucket, which is great for an organic gardener because then the urine can be used as a direct nutrient.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for this, Ole, and we're going to take a short break now, and then when we come back, we're going to have opportunity to ask you some questions that I didn't get around to asking. And now we're going to take a short break, and we're going to talk about the 7.65% solution, something called the SMART Act. If you think that your Social Security isn't going to take care of you, A, you're right, and B, here's an idea of what we might be able to do in the future.
They tell me I was born with it.
They say I'm gonna die with it.
They promised my children would be free of it.
It's only gotten worse.
Today's young Americans have inherited the single greatest financial debt in history, over $13 trillion in unfunded Social Security benefits. In 1950, the fatally flawed system of Social Security functioned with a ratio of 16 workers supporting each retiree. Today, there are 3. For our children, there will only be 2.
We will be the first generation to leave the children and the grandchildren worse off than any other generation.
These poor little innocent children coming into the world now shouldn't have to pay off our debts.
We're going to be basically living off the backs of our children and our grandchildren forever, and they're going to be paying into a system that's going to have absolutely nothing left for them.
But there are some things that you don't compromise, and I think the children's future is one of those things.
Instead of preparing for this long-predicted crisis, Congress has spent more than 20 years raiding the Social Security surplus to pay for other government programs and pork barrel projects.
I'm sick to death of people stealing my money, and that is how I look at it. I look as if I've been stolen from.
The money is not there, it's being taken, and come 15 years from now, we are going to have a serious deficit.
Well, I don't want future generations to be blaming me for the debt that's going to be heaped upon them.
We need to do it for our children's sake. We would not rob from their savings account on a day-to-day basis to buy the groceries, but that's basically what we're doing with Social Security right now.
While Congress continues to ignore the impending Social Security crisis, the burden continues to grow. Every month that goes by without a solution, the system goes $50 billion deeper into debt.
If we don't do something immediately, these problems are going to be almost insurmountable.
We can't fix it 10 years from now, it'll be worse. We can't fix it 15 years from now, it'll be even worse than that.
I'm hoping it's not too late for my generation to do something to help my children and my grandchildren, but I fear that if we don't do something quickly, it is too late to help them.
What if there was a courageous solution to the Social Security crisis? Would Washington even listen?
I will listen to any proposal that might be put up.
I would listen because it affects my children and my grandchildren's future.
I promise you that I will listen.
I can assure you I'll be listening.
We'll listen.
We will listen.
I will be very willing to listen to any solution to solve these problems with Social Security. I think it's important for our future, I think it's important for our children's future, and it's important for the health and well-being of our country.
Hi, welcome back to Freedom TV. This is I'm here with Ole Ersson, and we're talking about Humanare. And we're going to open up the phones now for questions if any of the viewers have for you that I forgot or didn't ask, and they want to have a burning desire to know the answer of. In the meantime, I've got a couple more questions I'd like to ask you. Now, you told me what role worms play in this. And I love worms. I really enjoy worm composting. I don't name or walk any of them, but they're really very friendly to me, and I'm very friendly to them. Which do you think is the composting or the worm situation of just putting the worms in there? It seems to me, I don't know, I could be wrong, that the worm one might have a few more problems associated with it.
It's definitely more finicky than our usual compost pile. So some people process their household scraps or kitchen scraps with a worm bin. But if you do that, you have to be quite attentive because worms have particular environmental requirements. If you depart from their requirements, the worms are at risk for dying. For example, they have to have a certain amount of moisture. They can't be too hot. They can't be too dry. It's a project to have a worm bin that is viable and that continues to work. I know a lot of people who had worm bins and they gave up on it. Compost bins, on the other hand, are pretty immune to fluctuations of the environment and temperature and so forth. It's just different bacteria, different other microorganisms that break down the compostables into the final product of compost have different temperature requirements. When the environment changes, certain of the nutrients, certain of the organisms change and others, certain increase and others decrease. But a compost pile always is easy to keep.
Okay, I think we've got a call. Do we have a caller? I think we have a caller. Yes. Do you have a question for Ole? No? Guess not. Okay, I thought we did. One of the things I want... Oh, yes. Hello? Oops. Hi, what happened?
Hello?
Hi, do you have a question for Ole?
Hello?
Hello? Are you there?
Yes.
Do you have a question for Ole?
Yes, I do. I was wondering about the sawdust. You mentioned that. I didn't quite get how often do you put that into the bucket and how often, and is there any alternatives since I don't usually have sawdust laying around, and that's it. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. What do you use to balance the high nitrogen excrement that's put into the bucket, as well as household scraps, kitchen scraps and so forth? This system is often called the sawdust toilet system. So sawdust is a great material to help balance and to deodorize the pile too. So after each addition to the bucket, that's when you put sawdust or some other high carbon material. What we use in our family is wood chips that we get from tree pruning companies. You can get that delivered, and they're widely available in any area where trees are trimmed and the trimmings are ground up and chipped.
Right.
So that's what we typically use. But wherever you live, if you live near some kind of agricultural area, there will be all kinds of high carbon scrap or high carbon material that you can
Right.
use. For example, chopped straw, rice hulls, other type of
Right.
cereal byproducts. It's just high carbon materials.
So basically anything high carbon
High
you
carbon,
could stick in there.
absolutely, yes.
Now, would you be, I know we use shredded newspaper in the worm bin. Would you be able to use that?
You could use shredded newspaper or shredded office paper for that matter.
Now that
absolutely.
wouldn't, however, that would not take care of very much of the smell. Or is the smell really associated with covering?
It's covering, right? So that would very, very well take care of any
so
odors.
shredded newspaper would...
I should point out that privies are known for their odors. This system is not known to create any odors, except during use. And as with any toilet.
Yeah.
So when you cover after use, there is no odors at all that come out of the toilet in between uses.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
This is a very aesthetic process.
Now, what in your experience has been the single most, or I should say, the biggest hurdle for people to get over in starting to go do this?
The answer is one word: fecophobia.
Fecophobia.
Okay. So most people are not in the habit of dealing with their own
It's like,
excrement.
oh, it's flushed away and I don't have to deal with it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right,
and none of us have usually been challenged with the process of having to dispose in either a proper or an improper fashion of their excrement. Now, people who have kids, and the kids are diapered, are familiar with this process. So it gives you a little bit of experience. But basically, it's a kind of a hands-on process. You have to be willing to deal with these issues, and some people have not achieved that state yet.
Right. So it's basically just getting used to, what comes out.
Yes, exactly.
And, getting, and to me, it has to do with being personally responsible for what goes on in your life. The stuff that you create, the messes that you leave, whether they be excrement or anything else, to me it's my responsibility to kind of keep a handle on that and take care of it. Now, do you think over the last, say, decade or so that it's increasing at a fairly rapid clip?
I would say without a doubt, as people learn of this method, we have development technicians in third world countries who are realizing they've been teaching wrong technologies or inappropriate technologies for decades. When they discover a system like this, it's like a revolution for them. So we have people who are promoting development in third world countries who are embracing technologies just like this because it's so appropriate.
Right. And it's so easy.
It's so easy.
And it's so transferable from one place to another. You don't have to, you don't need anything, basically.
No.
I mean, if you really had to, you could do it without even the bucket. You could create a system and just move it from one place to another and then put it in a big pile.
And not only that, there are gardeners all over the world, organic gardeners all over the world, for whom this process is just a natural extension. They'd never thought of doing this before, and now they think of it, and a light bulb goes on, and they realize, gosh, this is the way to do things.
Exactly. Though one of the things that drew me to this, I didn't even know that it was going on until Mary Saunders told me about it, was that I was actually starting to, well, we hadn't actually started it, but we were going to do a special worm bin for cat poo. And try getting rid of it that way. And then now, after you've talked about this, I went, you beauty, here we go. We can get rid of everybody. So much for having it in the trash can every month or so. We're not going to have to do that anymore. We can just compost it in the compost heap. So whether it's a cat or a person, it's irrelevant because both of us are, omnivores, and it's going to be dealing with the same kinds of pathogens.
Absolutely.
What do you see as the potentiality in the future of what would you like to see in a perfect world happen with this idea? Well, let's be realistic. A lot of people, particularly in wealthier countries, are not going to be interested in doing this. So I think we need to realize that. But I think there's a tremendous potential for this technology, particularly in areas where they don't have or cannot afford tens of thousands of dollars per person to develop a centralized sewage system that's prone to failure, requires an army of technicians to maintain, and so forth. So this is a technology that has tremendous promise worldwide, particularly in the developing countries.
in wealthier countries where people have their sewage systems, their decentralized sewage or centralized sewage systems, I don't expect a lot of people to adopt this practice. But really, there's no reason that you can't. If you want to close your nutrient cycle, you can do this anywhere on the planet, including whether you have a flush toilet in your house or not.
Right.
Just because you have one doesn't mean you have to use it.
Exactly. So it's really, it depends on the individual as to how far you want to carry this. And I know here in Portland, I mean, I thought I was pretty up on the recycling stuff, and I'd never even heard of it until...
You'll see people in Portland who are doing this. They have the most beautiful, the most vibrant gardens in the city. So you can often identify Humanure composters by looking at their yard.
Out there, yeah.
The first thing they do is take out the lawn and turn it into flowers and vegetables. So,
exactly. And then I've seen pictures of your lawn and your house. It's amazing. Your house is really incredible.
Thank you.
And I really want to thank you so much for being on the show today and telling us all about Humanure. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us about some of the other wonderful stuff that you do, because I looked on your website and I went, oh, he's good for about 5 or 6 shows. So I sincerely hope you can come back and talk to us about a lot of the things that you're doing.
My pleasure, and I hope to get together again with you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for joining us on Freedom TV. We've been here with Ole Ersson, and we've been talking about human waste, Humanure, and it's a very interesting topic and one that a lot of people are a little sensitive about, but I think you'll check into it yourself and go online. I mean, the Humanure manual is free. You can look at it online. I think you can even download it. So do have a good look into this subject, because it is one of the most incredible ways I've seen of being able to take care of one of the most nagging and persistent and before now unrecyclable things that have been in our life cycle. So we hope you join us next week on Freedom TV. We will not be having a guest next week because the studio will be closed, and we will have a tape for you. So see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
I cry for my country, for the pain that it's been through. She's been made to suffer for the profit of a few. Storm clouds are forming, winds of change now touch our shores. Our hear forefathers are crying as the dream's been crucified.